This video is about 5 steps that will end my hobby hoarding. Hobby hoarder. I do not like that term, but it is obvious I'm a fairly good candidate. I made a video recently where I talked to my wife about what it means to be a hobby hoarder, and here I want to discuss the antidote to the chaos. 5 steps that I will be following in 2021 and thereafter. At the very least, this is a recommitment to the goal and aspiration of having a large, beautiful painted collection. So in 2016, I made a video looking at the state of my collection. It's called, I think, the Hobby Confessional. And at the time, I had 4,667 miniatures, of which only 1,187 were painted. And I had 3,480 unpainted models. Over the last 4 years, I've worked on a few different armies and a variety of smaller painting projects. In some ways, I have painted quite a lot, but my spending has outpaced any progress. And I've been keeping track of my models purchased and painted for the last 4 years, and I usually run a fairly terrible deficit. This year was bad, really bad. And the numbers from 2016 are now quite outdated. So in the past 4 years, my collection, even though it was quite large in 2016, has actually grown rather dramatically. So now I have 7,268 models, of which 1,677 are painted. And I now have 5,591 unpainted models. If you're curious about the point value of this type of collection, it's just shy of 180,000 points. Now, I've always been a collector, not just of Warhammer, but of many things. So here, though, I do think I need to take serious steps to change course. I'm starting to really recognize that there is a mental burden, essentially, that comes alongside just kind of rampant purchasing. And as I talked with Mrs. Hooves, I don't think I'll sell any models. Everything's assembled. Everything's organized. And if I had unassembled models, I would probably consider selling those. But the IKEA effect in me is pretty strong. I really do have an attachment to the models that I built and the aspirations that involve having basically every army in the game. So clearly the simplest solution is to paint more and spend less. But that is easier said than done. My brain always works out all the different, possible exceptions and reasons why things don't work out perfectly. And it is becoming increasingly clear to me that without focus, I'm essentially collecting nothing. Right? I have plenty of armies, but many are outdated, and in some ways unplayable. And I want to be in line with newer releases in the meta, and that requires investment. So I don't think a complete moratorium on spending is the right way forward. Neither is, at this point, my backlog is so considerable. Even in 2016, I was very much conscious of the fact that it would take years, right, to work through that backlog. And I don't think there has to be an off-ramp. There has to be some way to siphon and direct that purchasing urge in a positive direction, while also ensuring that I feel fulfilled and can accomplish my hobby goals. So when AOS launched, I painted a few armies from start to finish. I'm not sure why I really went away from that method, or that, right? I painted all of my Wanderers, I painted my Tomb Kings, I painted my Slaanesh Demons, and I had a lot of fun with those. But for whatever reason, I think it's when I transitioned and I moved to Colorado, and in many ways regular content kind of fell apart on the channel. I've been really struggling to get it back on track, but ever since then it really felt like I wasn't in touch with what was going on. And so I started fixating more on painting kind of small standalone painting projects, right? For off and on I've tried to do this 1 week, one project, which is fun. I definitely enjoy doing that. But one thing that's very clear is that given the size of my collection, that type of scattershot approach does not provide the results I need at all, right? I can do those type of scattershot projects for 20 years and not have a completed army, right? And having an army of 2 or 3 painted units and the rest unpainted just doesn't make sense. And so I need a more cohesive strategy that allows me to paint a lot of models and also allows me to purchase some, but largely ties my hand in that category. And so, again, for many people this might be obvious, and these steps seem so stupidly plain and simple, but my brain works in such a way that I really do need kind of self-imposed structure. And for me, this seemed like completely revolutionary. And so I've created 5 basic steps. And these steps allow me to purchase new things, but also, more importantly, ensure that I paint far more than I could ever purchase. I need steps that are manageable because of the size of my collection. So the first step here: buy all codices, battle tomes, and required accessories to play the game. Seems fairly obvious. I will say that if you own a lot of armies, as I do, this is a sizable investment of my wargaming budget. For a long time, I actually stopped buying these because I wasn't playing as much as I would like. I'd buy a brand new battle tome or codex, and by the time I even thought about putting the models down and playing with that army, the new one had already come out, right? And from a collecting standpoint, it's still nice to have the army book and the old codexes. I have many of the old Warhammer army books and such, but you can buy older, outdated codexes and battle tomes on eBay for a fraction of the price. So it really felt like a bad investment. I always was thinking, well, I'll just buy them later when they're outdated. But the consequence of that is that I have all these armies and I can't even play with them because I don't even have the rules. And my primary interest is to become more involved and aware of the current meta, even if my army's unpainted, because I still want to be able to play with those models if I want. And so this is something that kind of a step forward for me in some weird way. It might seem, again, very obvious to many people, but you're literally buying like a book almost every single month nowadays. But that's okay. I'd rather buy that than models. And it still gives me a sense of what my opponent might be able to do if I play against them. And I think it's a worthwhile investment at this point. But I might also put some money towards my gaming room, tech for my channel, and other Warhammer collectibles. If I have a sufficient budget for any conceivable upcoming purchase, then don't spend it all on models, basically. So step 2 is pick one army or game, buy everything necessary to modernize or make the game playable, and then paint every model from that specific army or game. Now, this is the big one. I can buy some models for an army providing I paint those purchases. And the models I already own for that army. So this ensures that the army is useful and viable in the game. Since I have a large collection, and I do not like to see a variety in my painting projects, or I do like to see a variety in my painting projects, I broke down each army into sub-components. So basically, wherever there is an allegiance or sub-faction that has, and this is the important thing, a unique sculpt, I'm considering those as distinctive armies. So think of Iron Jaws, right? You can play 3 or 4 different types of Iron Jaws, but I consider that to be one collection, because there are not, at this time at least, really unique sculpts, other than, I guess, they're one character. But think of instead Beasts of Chaos that are really distinctly divided into Brayherd, Warherd, and the Dragon Ogre faction. Those are one army is essentially 3 different armies. And I think because my collection is rather large, it's best to focus on these types of smaller components so that I'm not stuck basically saying to myself, I'm going to paint every single Beast of Chaos model before I move on. Because I basically will then, not buy anything for an entire year. And I don't think that's realistic. I think I would break under that. So what I've done is I've divided my army into Brayherd, Warherd, and the Dragon Ogres. And I'm going to pick one of those. And each army in my collection, from Space Marines to anything that's really conceivably broken down like that, I've done that. And so I end up with 100 and some different factions. And I'll pick one of those, buy any of the necessary models to flush that collection out, make it viable, playable as kind of a standalone faction, and then I'll paint every model I own from that smaller sub-faction army. I think that makes it more manageable. I think at that point I could see myself completing an army, every 2, 3, 4 months. That's what I would ideally be looking for. I would say, 3 to 6 armies a year is kind of my goal. And I've completely recognized that I'm still probably on track for 15 years at that rate, but that's okay. I'll still be making progress. I just want to see those numbers go down every single year rather than up every single year. So step 3. All right. Do not buy any other models while completing step 2. I have one opportunity to buy models to modernize a collection. Thereafter, if the project takes 3 or 4 months to complete, I will not be buying models during that period. That kind of should ensure that I have the necessary budget for buying anything I need or want, conceivably, for that army. And step 4 is select the next army for step 2, right? Going back to step 2, choosing the next army. And there are several different considerations here. I could elect to follow the release cycle or prioritize newer books, rotate between games and alliances. I definitely want a 40k army painted up, or simply choose something cool, right? And depending on how much I have in my budget, it could be prudent to select armies that are more affordable than others. I've done some analysis of the models and armies I currently own, and I'm well aware that there are some armies that are much greater investment than others at this point. That, for example, I think Ogre Maw tribes, I could get a really decent 2,000 point army for less than $100, because I already own most of the existing infrastructure of that army. And the same with Caradron Overlords. Right? I already own a bunch of KO, but it's not enough to really field a decent 2,000 point army. but with 1 or 2 extra purchases, it's on the table. It's ready to play. And I need to be more conscious of that when I'm making my purchases, right? More selective, more targeted, rather than just mindless collecting. Like, I have a tendency to just spend a ton of money on like 12 or 15 different factions. And again, you accomplish absolutely nothing there, right? Each of those armies increases by like 50 to 100 points, and it's not useful whatsoever. Step 5. If an army that has been previously painted is updated with new rules or models, then and only then do I have the option to make a few limited purchases. So I've painted a few armies only to see them become outdated as new rules change and the dynamic of the army is changed in the meta, right? So like I'm thinking my Slaanesh Demon army that I painted up 4-5 years ago. Quite a nice little army. Not bad. Every model was painted up, and I haven't touched them since. Okay? And the problem there is that since then, a new book has come out, and Keeper's Secrets is now, a very essential unit in the meta. And all I have are a ton of demonettes, which are not useful in the meta. And so I do definitely think that that is a really good example of it would have been nice to have been more current in what was going on. And that makes sense to me at that time to stop, buy a few things, paint them immediately, right? Then move on with the next project, right? So the painting here would take place between step 2 and 4, right? So the next time I'm about to transition to a new project, stop, paint up anything that I purchased. Now again, I'm going to try to be more selective, more targeted. Try not to just mindlessly buy, okay, well they released 5 different units, I'm just going to buy every single one, right? No. Try to make a best strategy. Take a look at the battle tome that I would have already purchased and try to make the best choice I possibly can. So these steps might be really obvious or not necessary to some hobbyists. My mind needs this type of framework or rules. Otherwise, it's just a little chaotic, and anything becomes justifiable with the right logic, right? And I'm not placing any arbitrary deadlines. The one thing I quickly learned with 1 week, 1 project is that you don't produce any other content when you're just focused on painting one project and trying to get that done in a week. So I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm just going to let it go as much as it takes. And I would ideally like to do between 3 and 6 armies a year. But if it only pans out to be 2 or 3, that's okay. I will try my best to commit to daily painting. And that's all I'm going to do with regards to a timeline. I think my collecting ambition and my desire to buy new models, I think will hopefully give me enough of impetus to get some real work done and to make a commitment to it. And I'll let that become my motivation, kind of harness that desire to purchase. Now, I recognize it will take years. I knew this 4 years ago, and the backlog's even bigger. So, but I do know if I stick with these steps, that backlog should reduce quite significantly every single year. And I can select armies that have kind of a larger model count than others, like Moon Clan Gits, for instance. I just painted up 48 goblins this month. That army makes sense to me. I've already painted up some of them. Selecting something like that to get a huge amount of models kind of off the unpainted list would be great. But I think the first project of 2021 will likely be Hedonites of Slaanesh. modernize my Slaanesh demons, get on board that meta right away, so I'm, able to talk intelligently about what is going on in the current state of Age of Sigmar. And I definitely do want a 40k army painted up this year. And my wife really wants her Night Haunt army painted up. My goal primarily is to probably get 2 painted Age of Sigmar armies. Then it's at least possible to play beautiful games on a painted table with painted terrain and painted armies. And it opens the possibility for battle reports and other things. So wish me luck as I attempt to rectify my mistakes and find order among the chaos. Best wishes, and best wishes for 2021. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by commenting on the video, hitting that little like button, and subscribing for more Warhammer content.